Hey guys, I hope you're all having a wonderful day today and you're excited to listen to this conversation I had with Pete Alway. Pete has, I believe, just submitted his PhD thesis while he was investigating lumbar stress fractures in elite fast bowlers at Loughborough University. So doing some work with the county cricketers. This was a really interesting conversation. We had it last year during the lockdown. So there were some cool insights that we were tossing around and discussing because international players, elite players, were moving into the season having much less time to prepare themselves physically and to get the workloads under their belt for a long season ahead. So there's a couple of really cool discussion points when we're discussing some of the research that Pete's been doing and then trying to link it into some practical outcomes. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below after you've watched the video. I always make sure I try and get back to as many people as I can. And I hope you enjoy the conversation.
It's going well, mate. It was a good sunny day here today, which was brilliant. We've had 3 really good days in a row, and I've had a little bit more interest with some fast bowlers keen to do some stuff, and I really don't want to have to go to there are no indoor centres to go to do it, so I need some good weather outside. Otherwise, I can't coach them. But on the plus side of having good weather outside, I don't have to pay for facility hire.
So different to here, where it's like indoor nets are king all year round, really.
Yeah, I realise that. Like watching some of the other pages on Instagram, like not many of them seem to do a whole lot of stuff outside. And the ones that do seem to have to, like, they've called off training for the day. And to me, that sounds weird. Like, fuck, imagine having to call off training. Like, I feel almost guilty having to text these people and say, sorry, mate. And also,
it's the worst thing about being British. The fact is, you get subpar coaching because you never get to train outdoors, and then when you do, the ball does all sorts. So like, you don't know how to bat against a swinging ball. He's like, what is this? This is crazy.
That is crazy. That's cool. Well, this is exciting.
We just had net start up again, so we're allowed to train again.
Yeah.
Injury rates going to be sky high.
It's actually why this is going to be so good, because I reckon probably the most common injury that's probably going to come out of this is going to be, you're thinking overuse lumbar spine sorts of issues. So this makes this conversation even more important.
It's good timing.
It definitely is. And yeah, like part of the thing that I thought would be really cool, like, I don't necessarily, want to be some super knowledgeable guy. I thought, what if I just sort of stuck as a really good generalist and just had all these people that I've met, have a good conversation with, and then, because I've got stuff that I want to learn, and then you've got knowledge that hopefully you want to share.
Yeah.
And you can put that back out into people that are curious.
I think it's a great idea, because I think there's definitely the interest from people, and I think it's good just to get like evidence-based practice out there rather than just anecdotal evidence and stuff that is rife in cricket. I'm sure you've probably seen it all before.
Absolutely. Actually, Alex said something, Lasker, who was at the conference as well, and she was saying she wanted to almost like canvas where coaches learn their information. I almost sat there and thought for a second, and I thought, I reckon most coaches learn from their own playing experience and from what they got taught.
Yeah.
If that's definitely it, fuck, if that's as far as it goes. And I thought, I wonder if people even, like, instead of asking questions about things they don't know, they just, I think with fast bowling, say, nah, like, don't worry about it. Like, should you improve technique? Well, I don't know anything about it, so don't worry about it. Just bowl it off stump,
Yeah, and that's very true. But I think slowly things are changing. Like, there's more, I guess you can say, science-based coaches, or coaches who are willing to have faith in science. It's encouraging.
Seriously, well, I love applied science, so that's that fancy little term that I try and tell people when they ask me, like, oh, how did you learn this? Well, I mean, I got knowledge, then I learned how to use it. I really don't know how to answer those kinds of questions when people like ask such a generally broad question. The common one's, how do I bowl faster? It's like, well,
easy, right? Just
if it
just like rotate your arm quicker.
Yeah.
Done.
If it was that simple, I'd be probably, coaching internationally. But it's not that simple. There's a bit that goes into it. And people also break down the technique into like, if I increase my delivery stride, that'll help me as a bowler. It's like, well, that's like just this little small bubble. You realize there's so much that goes into that. How do you increase your delivery stride? What's it going to have on the rest of the action? Like I find it interesting. I actually find I learn a lot from some of the questions that I get because it helps me to think, how would I explain it to someone? And
like fast bowling is hard to coach as well because there's so much going on in such a small amount of time, and like relatively people aren't aware of what their body's actually doing in that time. It's very like it's a self-taught movement really.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge for coaches is how can you adapt or work with the athlete to optimize their sort of natural technique.
I started breaking it down into like you've got your run up, you've got to jump and gather, and then you've almost got like an unraveling from back foot contact into your follow through. Because I think when people think, your back foot contact, your delivery stride, your front foot contact, your ball release, and you follow through like that, it's not a realistic way to break it down because it's not like you can think about, I want to land tall back foot contact, I want to cycle this arm out, I want to slam this, this front leg down, but not too much, and then I want to be able to like bang myself through. And I do see some of the coaching online goes into detail, about that, and, I'm sure there's a context that isn't given to people when you're looking at, I won't go into the concepts, but that sort of stuff. But if you just think of it as, if you get yourself, I like to think, if you get yourself into a nice position at back foot contact, then hopefully it unravels pretty well.
That's logical. I mean, set a good base. Everything should flow from there.
Yeah, I know. I think simplistic works best, at least. That's the way I like to say it. I remember, I think Felt said something good. There's two kinds of people. There's those that like have knowledge and simplify it, and there's those that complicate things. And I was like, I'd like to be simple.
Yeah,
simple works well for me.
Always the best way. Like to the players who often aren't the most science-focused people in the world.
No, not at all. It's almost where I thought, being able to do something like this and having someone who's doing a doctorate on something so important, and then to try to bring that conversation to the people, I thought that'd be pretty cool, and
I mean, it's awesome. And you've pretty good like outreach in this as well. So it's cool to like get to share research with like a group of people who probably may have not ever delved into like cricket science before. So hopefully some people learn something from it, and yourself would be.
Oh, I definitely will. Seriously, it was really cool. Like I never expected to meet so many cool people and make so many awesome networks when I came to the conference, and to just sort of like tag along with Simon. And I reckon I had more of a good time at the after functions than I did sitting there in front of the presentations. I mean, look, half of them went over my head, and I thought this all kind of seems a bit not pragmatic. Some of the things.
Yeah, but I think those things are great because you can just have a beer with someone and just talk about their research. They can break it down into like more normal terms.
Seriously.
And like, that's the best way to learn things, always over a beer. So.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. That's why I poured myself a whiskey.
Nice. Would be a bit bold of me to start drinking whiskey at half past.
I was going to say, if you have your coffee there, then we're balancing out both ends of the spectrum. One of the things that I was curious to ask, I think you might have seen that the question that I put on Instagram story, and I was kind of shocked. Like a lot of people ask, like, what is a stress fracture? Like what even is it? And I sort of sat there and thought, I wonder if you put it in the simplest possible terms, how you'd go and like explain it to, well, a 12, 13, 14-year-old who's probably, a definite subcontinent. They seem to bowl and bowl and bowl and then bowl some more.
Yeah, it's basically bowl till you break and then keep bowling some more, and end up with a pretty interesting back. So stress fractures, if you think of bone as any material, stress fractures are just caused by micro damage, which accumulates over time until it reaches a critical point where the bone can't take it anymore and you get a fracture all the way through. So a good analogy for this is if you get a chip on your windshield, and it starts off as just, like a tiny little dot, and then each time which you hit a bump in the road, that crack gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it reaches a point where your whole windshield fails. And that's what a stress fracture is.
What would you call each bump in the road? Like 2 days of bowling in a row, 50 overs in a week.
Yeah, so bone constantly is in this battle of being damaged and being repaired, getting stronger, etc. So if you see each bump in the road would be something like insufficient rest. So if you're bowling like multiple days in a row, or if you have spikes in work, let's say, like a 50 over week, gonna cause some pretty substantial damage to bone. But the way that I like to think of it, obviously, like workload is a risk factor to stress fracture, like with any tissue injury, like whether that's muscle, bone, ligament, tendon. But with bones, you're looking at something where you're almost on this seesaw, and if the person is the sort of pivot point of the seesaw, and then on either end you have the load, so how many balls you're bowling over a certain amount of time, and then rest on the other side. And each individual has a different balance that they need to optimize their bone strength.
A good analogy. I love analogies. That's perfect. Like, absolutely perfect. I wonder if I can get like a little seesaw sort of thing going on an Instagram post.
But I mean, like, if you think about who gets, like, who is the most likely group to get lumbar stress fractures, it's your young fast bowlers, like the guys who are 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, trying to make their way into the game. So their tolerance to workload will be relatively low compared to like your senior test match players who can take massive loads and they're fine, and the rest they need might be slightly longer as well. So that's where the sort of individuality comes into it, and it's why, although we can prescribe workloads, it's not a sort of one size fits all thing. You have to know a lot about the bowler before you can start saying like this is what's safe for them, this is what's unsafe. But I think if you were to give advice to any fast bowler coming through, it would be that they are their own coach when it comes to their workloads. Like if they're playing 4 or 5 days a week, you probably need to take a look and be like, what am I benefiting from here? Like by bowling, on the 5th day, they're probably going to be sore, and it's just common sense, really. Just find that balance that works.
The common thing, like common sense, is not that common.
No, sadly not.
That's it. I remember, I think it was Nathan Keeley I was having a chat with, who's a coach up in Sydney, and he was saying, for his younger guys, he enjoys a minimum dosage necessary sort of understanding, where as the smallest possible workload that we can give them to achieve the confidence, the skills that they want, like the better. And I listened to another sort of cricket academy here in Australia did a podcast with the physio for Cricket Victoria, and they must have done some research that they put out last year or something about, and again, same thing, young guys who were getting injured, and they looked at some of the mechanisms, but for me it wasn't specific enough because it was like hip weakness and like technical issue. And I was like, what? I want specifics, like break it down for me. What do you mean by hip? Can they not squat? Can they not deadlift? Do they lack some sort of mobility? So yeah, it's those sorts of things that I was curious to delve in a bit deeper, because
I mean, I think that's a good point as well. I think there's so much practice in cricket where it's just bowlers just in nets having to bowl at batters over after over with no specific aim to it. So like quality of practice is really important. Like rather than bowling 8 overs of just in a net with no specific reason, 4 overs of specific, you're going to try this, this, and this. So much better for the bowler's development rather than just just bowling and whacked in the nets. So.
It makes so much sense. And now that if I think about it, I'm guessing the kinds of bowlers who would be doing that would be the ones who are younger, the ones who are playing at a lower level without as much like oversight from coaches who are probably a bit more experienced, a bit more educated, who can sort of say, we're going to have this this specific sort of goal. Like when I went from district back to club level, I went from having 4 bowls in a net but you'd bowl like 2 at a time. So you've got to bowl your 6, and then you'd have that exactly the same break you'd get if you were bowling a spell.
Yeah.
To the club training, when you've got like 7 or 8 bowls in a net, or you've got 2, and you almost end up bowling all night because I did not bowl very much, and my back suffered because of it. Like,
yeah, I mean,
it's almost like I said, seesaw. Too much rest, not enough stimulation. So, going on from because Simon was saying in what we sort of talked about yesterday, and he referenced some of the older research about lateral flexion and sort of cancer rotation. I think he even might have mentioned, I think we had a conversation a while back, that I don't think it was cancer rotation was as much of an association as it once was thought to be. And lateral flexions, I'm curious.
So shoulder counter rotation is based off some research, I think in the 90s. So
there you go, yeah.
It's a good 2 decades old. I think, and a lot of the research back then, it was focused just on any lower back injury. So fast bowlers, common injuries, obviously stress fractures. You also get disc injuries, just like low back pain, very common in fast bowlers because the loads which you're putting through the spine. So I think what's important is to realize what is shoulder counter rotation trying to measure. Is what it's measuring is how the shoulders rotate back as you go from back foot contact into the delivery stride, where the bowlers get the most side on. So what shoulder counter rotation measures, it's a 2D measure of a 3D movement. So if you think about how the spine moves in fast bowling, it doesn't just move in one direction, it's moving in 3 different directions. I mean, you could argue it moves in 6 different directions because of how the vertebrae move on top of each other. That's a whole different story. But in terms of the rotation, you're looking at the shoulders for a movement that happens in the lumbar spine. And while it might show association, the accuracy of that measure, there's now much better ways we can measure spinal motion, like with our motion analysis stuff, which I'm sure you've seen before. And there's plenty of like YouTube videos of boulders covered in all these dots and going through it. The problem that we have is the fast bowling community of elite fast bowlers is relatively small. So when you look at injury studies in stress fractures in like runners, tibial stress fractures are really common in them. They can get hundreds and hundreds of participants to come through because there are, running is such a popular sport. It's easy to get participants.
Lord knows why it's a popular sport.
Elite level, you're very limited. So I think we've been like England cricket have been collecting data for maybe 10-15 years now, motion analysis wise, and we've only just broke through 100 fast bowlers. Gotcha. So it's a slow.
Because I did read the paper you put out from 2010 to 2016, I think it was, that you went through the fast bowlers during that period and looked for some associations and whatnot and mechanisms.
Yeah, so that was just looking for workload characteristics related to stress fracture. But I mean, most of those players didn't go through motion analysis. They were just like your run-of-the-mill like county players, like journeymen.
Gotcha.
So, but it was a big cohort. I mean, but that just reflects the fact that we have 18 professional teams here. So like in Australia, it's a bit more difficult because you got 6 professional teams.
Yeah, I think so. 6 or 7.
Big bash. Yeah,
God, I'm actually not sure. Actually, I think it's 6. Yeah. I guess one of the things I was curious about, does that mean that because all the studies and stuff get done on the guys who are at the elite level, does it then get like the recommendations and whatnot? Are they then almost like based off your elite, so to speak? So when you try to filter it back into someone who's an amateur bowler who probably isn't as athletic, as robust, you might say, you might need to adapt it a bit.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair criticism, but I think given that we do motion analysis on all these players when they're really young, like your young
perfect.
elite 18-year-old probably isn't going to look too different from your sub-elite 18-year-old. Like in terms of physical characteristics, there's probably not too much difference between them because they haven't had that input from like S&C coaches yet. So generally, you know, we have a good laugh in the office, like when we're going back through the data and like we see the photos of the players from like when they were like 18, 19, and you realize how small they are. Like they're so skinny. You're like, how has this person in like 5 years gone from this into like an absolute tank? And
Yeah,
this is sad. But I think so that is a fair point. But I think the recommendations which come out of the research can be applied at all levels.
no, that's perfect.
Especially we're looking at performance as well. I know Pete Worthington did that paper in 2013 that looked at the 4 factors that relate to ball speed. I think that's very easy to translate into amateur cricket as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in the presentation that Feltz and Shiny did, they sort of said that they sent that out to people as almost a way to try to see who was going to hit the KPIs and could make it to the next level, which is great, actually. Like, I could definitely go and do that. If there was a way that I could do it and it wouldn't take me so much time and I could do it at a rate that was going to be worthwhile, then yeah, definitely. I think that'd be an awesome idea to do it. I had a question there as well, based on what you just said. But I'm definitely going to end up having thoughts in my head that I'm going to end up forgetting because it's good. Actually, I was going to say, like, when you're looking at, there was 3 sort of key things I was looking at, like, you know, obviously youth being most at risk, workload, which you've talked about, and then like the technique, and those being your broad topics and then sort of filtered down. I guess when you guys are doing the motion analysis, what sort of stuff do you look at in the technique?
Sure. So like some of the stuff which I'm working on at the moment, it's so before I start going into this, after saying it, like this stuff hasn't been peer reviewed yet, which basically means, you know, I think it's right, but the science community may not think it's right, basically. So like they like have to look through it all. But we're very interested in the rear leg at back foot contact. So and like that's just going into the fact that like if you keep a stiff rear leg, so like one that doesn't flex too much, you're more likely when you're going forward, you have a more stable base. And a lot of this comes from research looking at ACL injuries, which might sound weird, like, you know, what are you doing looking at knee injuries when you're looking at back injuries? But people who get ACL injuries, when they do single leg drop jumps, those who have like those who go into greater knee flexion or hip flexion, the movement of the lumbar spine becomes more uncontrolled. Now, if you relate that back into fast bowling, if you have uncontrolled lumbar spine motion, particularly at front foot contact, you know, you're asking for trouble. So like I like front foot contact. The average for players, they put about 6 times their body weight through their body, but some players are up at 10, 11 body weights. And if you've got a spinal movement where players are in over 150% of their active range of motion, you're putting a lot of stress on the spine. So our thinking is if you get back foot contact right, you're going to be more controlled going forwards, and then you'll be taking some of that load off the spine, which hopefully means that we can reduce stress fractures.
So actually, with the like at front foot contact, are people, I know some of the cues will like slam your front leg down, and I guess you're looking at increasing the vertical ground reaction forces, but you don't so much like it's not the vertical forces, it's more being able to get yourself going forwards. Is it something where?
Not gone.
Oh, it's more just is that something where we don't want to try to slam the leg down to increase the forces because it's.
So personally, I don't believe that ground reaction force contributes much at the lumbar spine. I think if you look at the bone biology research, most bone adaptation and load on bone comes from muscles pulling on bone, which is why if you're getting into more unnatural lumbar postures, you're going to have more muscle force pulling on that bone, which is probably a bigger contributor. Like if you think about a fast bowler, most fast bowlers have pretty big leg muscles. So if you're looking at all that force, likely a lot of it gets dissipated by the time it gets into the spine.
Yeah.
But I mean, it will contribute to the load, but not as much as other people might think.
Yeah, I mean that sort of comes back to with the technique and what's happened to the lumbar spine. I'm thinking about it from a movement point of view. When you get the, like the lateral flexion, and then you get the rotation on top of that, as being something that if I was going to try and snap a spine, that's probably how I'd try and do it. Then you get some bowlers who probably more mixed action with the pelvis going off that way, and their hips aren't going to be straight at front foot contact, so they're probably going to have this lateral flexion to try to get a ball going straight, and then the rotation is that. In my mind, that sounds like pain.
I mean, I think any fast bowling action equals pain. Where you get it, when you're bowling action, yes. I mean, like mixed action bowlers, as a classified, I mean, like of all the players to come through England cricket's motion analysis, like over 80% of them have the mixed action. So I just think there's more to the mixed action than just injury prevention. There must be a performance component of being mixed. Mixed action, it's been associated with stress fracture, but I think you could associate any action with stress fracture. Really.
That's a good point. Correlation, causation.
Yeah, like if everyone's bowling with it, then
that's a really good point.
But I mean, if you're looking at the more side-on players, like if you think of the stretch that's putting on their like abs or any abdominal muscle, like on their sides, injuries will manifest from fast bowling in any way. So you're almost choosing what is the least severe injury a fast bowler can get. So would you rather have stress fracture versus side strain? And you're never going to cure all injuries in fast bowling just because of the nature of the activity. It's like it's the same with like baseball pitching. Like the velocities are so huge involved in it. You're never going to condition someone who can avoid injury at all times. And of course, like there's that age-related factor. So while like young fast bowlers might get stress fractures, older fast bowlers are more likely to get like disc injuries and like other things like that. So you're almost looking at a fast bowler throughout their career, and you can sort of categorize them by age to see like what injury they're going to get as well.
So what's one way? No, honestly, the off-topic stuff's where I get the most value, because it's the tangents people go on, and that's the conversation that I love. Like I was just thinking, when you said best case scenario, what's the injury that's the least gonna get them out of games and whatnot? What sorts of things, if you're thinking from a real simple sense, can you do to look at trying to build them into the most resilient as you can? Like, is technique something you look at? Is it just more the S&C sort of stuff and getting the nutrition, sleep?
Yeah, I mean that is the $1 million question right there, isn't it? How
it's a loaded question, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. Like fast bowling puts such strain on the body. Like we've seen, so we do DEXA scans on all the fast bowlers, which is just a way that we can measure how dense a fast bowler's bones are. And like what we found from it is that the lumbar spine of a fast bowler is as dense as what rugby players are. But then specifically on the opposite side to the bowling arm, like they have 30% more dense bone than what rugby players have. So if you think of the collisions involved in rugby, and then you're adding on 30% onto that, that's the kind of loading which the lumbar spine is under. So it's a really sort of like unique adaptation. But as a coach, how can you prep the body for something like that? Like there's nothing in the gym that can replicate what a fast bowler goes through. And that's not to say that like S&C doesn't have a place, because of course you've got to prep the lower body to undertake the lows to be able to resist collapsing at back foot and at front foot contact. And then you also need that strong abdominal structure to like resist all the loading from every possible direction, like whether that's twisting, flexing or flexing. So yeah, we generally like to talk about bowlers looking ripped from their knees to their nips. So I like that. If you look at fast bowlers, they have these sort of like wiry arms. They don't have much cast, but their quads, their glutes, their hamstrings and their core, they're incredibly strong in those areas. And I think it's one of those things which you can look at and start to understand what's important for fast bowling just by looking at all the elite fast bowlers.
So when
I think especially recently as well, there seems to be a trend away from, I know like in the early mid 2000s, there's that trend towards making bowlers like huge and massive, these big muscular beasts almost. Whereas now, all the quickest fast bowlers now, they're these lean, powerful bowlers, like like in England we have like Mark Wood, Jofra Archer. These guys weigh like 80 kilos, and but they're just low fat and just high power athletes, rather than just being big, strengthy, like a Stoinis.
Yeah. I reckon he loves it too.
Yeah.
I think I heard stories of him back in Melbourne where I think he was bench pulling like 120 or something and showing off the pythons. Classic Melbourne boy.
Yeah, man, he's just an animal.
Seriously, well, he mooses them, so it must add something.
I mean, yeah, like strength definitely has a role to play. I mean, the bloke just seems to jog in when he bowls, and it comes out at 80. So there must be some component.
Seriously,
what the Hulk.
One of the things I was thinking about, so with the rear leg at back for contact, when you're looking at being quite tall and whatnot, is something in the jump or the direction at which they're going, if I bring it back to the run up and the jump and gather, is there anything in there that you look at to help them when they get into that like back for contact position? Is it just jumping too high because they're jumping off on angles? It starts to fuck with their ability to control that position?
Sure. So, I mean, this isn't something which we've looked at yet, but I think it makes sense to sort of keep it simple. So these aren't necessarily things which you sort of look to change, but rather things like which you work with. Like if you think about a person who's spent their whole life sort of running up in a particular way and like how they land, their body's gonna be really adapted to that. So it would be like one of those things that you would have to almost like start again with. So if you were to change how someone runs in or like how they jump, you'd almost have to start from like zero again. So you'd have to build them sort of back up again. In terms of how they land, I like to think that if their rear leg collapse is probably due to their either running in too hard or their jump is either too high or like too long leading into back foot contact. Like they can't resist the forces that are going on at back foot contact. So you might want to look to reduce them to enhance their back foot ability.
That's a good point about the running in too fast. I think I sent a video to Feltz, and he was saying, I didn't even show him the whole thing, but again, collapsing at back foot was like, he's running in too quick. And I think because at least at a younger level on social media, people seem to know that if I run in faster, I'm going to bowl faster without sort of like the inverted U going. It gets to a point where you run in too quick and it starts to mess with your ability to self-organize.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is where S&C may play a part. Like if you don't prep the fast bowler to be able to tolerate the loads or running up faster, then they're just going to like fail by trying to run up faster. So that's S&C could be quite important, I think, moving forwards.
We're going to say it is because that's half my job. So that, and well, on the fast bowling side, it's very, very different to on the with the females and whatnot. I try and keep the two very separate, otherwise I'm going to have people very confused.
There could be a crossover episode.
Well, I think at some point there might be. I think people will be surprised to see some of the girls that I have are like probably 2 or 3 times stronger than some of the guys. I think I've had 6 or 7 girls squat over 100 kilos to depth.
Really? There'll be a lot of bruised egos when you start bringing that out.
I reckon as well. It's like when you bring out the speed gun, everyone thinks they bowl fast, and they do.
Like when I first came to Loughborough, Phelps put me through the speed gun with Shiny. I hit 57 miles an hour. Now, after 4 years of doing a doctorate and thinking that I understand stuff about fast bowling, 62 miles an hour.
Isn't it crazy? Like I reckon with all my my coaching with like Simon and whatnot, I probably gained about 12 miles, I reckon. And look, I was coming from a spot where I was broken and shit and all things going poorly. Actually, back with the rear leg, I've looked at some bowlers, and when they land it back for contact and the leg collapses and whatnot, they get like the chest almost drives too far forward, but the rear leg stays behind, almost like they kind of donkey kick out. And I wondered, they usually fall away to the side. So it looked like their pelvis is shifted back on the right side if they're right on bowler, but their spine's trying to bend and rotate that way. So they've got this weird like lengthening, but it's going under force. Whereas if you see guys, say, a lot of the English bowlers, like at ball release, their knees are pretty much together. They've got that rear leg to come through. I wondered if there was something in that which, you know.
I mean, in terms of injury, I think that's quite important, like when you're talking about these spinal postures there. So if you think about the lumbar spine position at front foot contact, if you get lower in your back knee, you're kind of trying to like muscle it through a bit more. And it appears like one of the ways which they try to do that is they end up getting their spine in a lordotic position. So they get this curve in the spine, which is like natural when you stand up, but not so natural when you're fast bowling. So if you think about what actually happens when the spine curves, like think of like all those vertebrae and like how they sit on each other. And then if you start to curve and then to side flex as well, what's likely to happen is you can increase the load on one side of the spine. And what I think maybe a mechanism of the actual stress fracture is that like one vertebrae, the actual facet joint of it, so the very tip of it hits on the vertebrae below. So if you break it down like fast bowling, when you land, you have this massive compression load from the ground reaction forces, and what happens in the discs is disc gets smaller. You also side flex. So if you think about these two things being the vertebrae, firstly the discs get smaller, so it becomes like this, and then if we side flex, higher up vertebrae can move more than the lower down vertebrae, so that they're like this. If you then lordotic, this is then going to curve like this, and this will curve like this. So then you get this bone on bone impact. If you get bone on bone impact, energy or force likes to flow through the easiest route. So it's not going to go through all the ligament and the protective structures. It's going to go through that point, and that accelerates the like micro damage process of bone.
That's perfect.
Which is why I think you often see players who naturally have a lordosis, or like hyperlordosis, like a excessively curved spine. Those are the guys who are much more likely to get stress fractures because the loading on their spine is huge.
Would you say like same as people who are naturally too anteriorly tilted don't almost have that movement awareness to be able to posteriorly tilt and get the glutes on?
Like that's another good point. Like if you're anteriorly tilted, how do you get your body in the right position to bowl? Like the easiest way is like just to lean back to like counteract what you've done. But of course, by leaning back, it then puts you at more risk. And this is a common mechanism of stress fracture in a lot of sports. So if you think of like gymnastics, for example, or like platform diving, anything that involves extension of the spine, like tennis serving as well, these are all key movements that all relate to fast bowling that cause stress fracture.
I was curious.
Also, weirdly, it's also seen in some populations, so Inuits, Eskimos. Most of them get stress fractures, and as far as I know, cricket fast bowling isn't a big sport. Arctic North, but it just comes down like
the Arctic North. I love that.
Like the anatomy of their spine. They, instead of their vertebrae getting wider and wider as they go down, they're like really, really narrow, which means that they get more bone on bone impact. So that's maybe the only thing that fast bowlers share with Inuits, but I just thought I'd bring it up because it's a cool fact.
That's so cool. Seriously. I'm not sure where to go from that. That's brilliant. I wanted to ask, so some of the things I thought about from an S&C point of view and like teaching people movement awareness is to have the ribs stacked on a pelvis. You know, if you think about that inner core, your box, your multifidus, your transverse, your pelvic floor and the diaphragm, but also like your pelvis being stable and the ribs being stable. But again, you get that anterior pelvic tilt, then you get guys that lean back. Usually the chest kind of gets forward and you get in these positions here. And I was almost wondering, I think people almost like lean back and get that. I don't think that's the best position. If you think about the leg tension relationship with the abs, and there's a middle ground there where the pelvis is stacked on the ribs. And
absolutely. And I think a lot of what you talk about comes from the ability to have really good control of the muscles around the hip, pelvis, and lumbar spine, like a lot of injuries in sport.
For S&C.
Yeah. And like lumbar pelvic control, It's key, and it's so difficult to like measure as well. But
yeah,
so that's why exercises like your dead bugs really important. Like, can you keep that lumbar spine grounded as you do the movement, or like do you slip into lordosis? I think that's a really good test to see how well a bowler can control. Because I mean, if you can't do it on the ground, then like, what chance do you have when you're putting thousands of newtons through your spine? So
I couldn't agree more. Like, I reckon that's where some of the thoughts have come around. You look at people in the gym and just give them basic movements, and their movement competency is so poor. Like, I reckon 80% of people I'd teach to RDL would probably be hyperextended, and that would be what they think is good posture.
Yeah, and like, there's some really good work in that coming out of South Africa with Helen Bain and Benita Oliver. Like, they did a lot of work in like proprioception, movement competency, like single leg squats, stuff like that, just being like real good red flags for low back injury.
I might have to get them onto a podcast.
I think it will reach out to your S&C instincts, I think.
Proprioception is something that, again, like, because when we talk about some of the knowledge and the mechanisms and some of these sorts of things, I start to think about, how would that apply if I was coaching it? Like, that's why I'm interested in like the rear leg, again, that collapse. That's something that I think about coaching. What if it doesn't come through with it's almost like lags behind. So I've got this unstable lumbar position. I'm guessing that's not going to be good for the spine. And again, like, how can I go about teaching that sort of stuff? And I know that there's probably been some research on, if you can't hold a 2-minute plank, that means your muscular endurance in your lower back is not going to be as good. And I think about applying that a little bit further. And, well, you side planks, if you can't probably deadlift X amount, same sorts of things.
I mean, it all ties together, doesn't it? So I know the two tests that Helen Bain found related to low back injuries were in the single leg squat, if your knee collapses in too much, so like if it gets into valgus, I think, then that relates to low back injury. Then also the Beering-Sorensen test, which is just like low back extension hold. So that it's like a reverse plank almost, like off the end of a bed, and then just hold yourself up for as long as possible. It looks like torture.
That's great. What are some of the like, if you're a 15, 16, 17-year-old bowler and you're doing some of the stuff that you shouldn't be doing, and you start getting like, how could people tell? What sort of signs, what kind of pains, what kind of, like, how do you tell, is what I was going to say.
Yeah, great question. So one of the interesting things about stress fractures, which we find, is that when we screen the players at the end of the season before they go off on a tour somewhere, they'll be asymptomatic and they'll have a stress fracture, and they're always a bit like, what the fuck? And we're also like, like, this happens, and it's a weird phenomenon, because you think if you have a fracture in bone, it should be painful, but that's not true all the time. But there's a few like clinical tests which can be used to help diagnose if you've got a stress fracture, or if you're on the pathway to stress fracture. And one of them is called the stalk test. So just try standing on each leg and then like leaning back, and if you feel pain in the top of your buttock, then there's a chance that you could have a stress fracture. But I think if you're starting to feel back pain as a fast bowler, firstly, don't try to bowl through it. Like, you won't bowl through back pain. Like, it will only get worse. The only cure, if there is a cure, is just rest, sadly, and it's the worst thing that any fast bowler wants to hear. But we know that if after a really heavy week, so say someone has a 50 over week, if we give players a week, 10 days off bowling, they usually come back and they're fine. It's if they keep bowling after they've had a really heavy week is when we see things progress into stress fracture. Like, stress fractures don't happen like that. It's a long process. So we see after a spike in workload, say a 50 over week, the fracture doesn't actually manifest until 4 to 6 weeks later, which means you have this window of opportunity to not let it develop into a stress fracture. But that that 50 over week is almost like a trigger which can lead to it. So I think for any young fast bowler, you've got to be aware of what you're bowling each week and stuff, and then adapt your following weeks. I know it can be difficult because if you're trying to prove yourself, you know, if you're playing school cricket, club cricket, district cricket, grade cricket, whatever, you know, you're playing a lot of cricket, but you have to look at the bigger picture. Like missing a week of cricket isn't going to be terminal to your career, whereas a stress fracture in some cases can be terminal to someone's career. So you've got to find that balance, and you've got to be like your own best coach. You've got to be like your own best S&C. You know, you are in control of everything at that age. Like you don't yet have the input from, you know, world-leading experts. You are very much on your own. Point.
That's sort of where some of this sort of stuff I think is it's really cool because again, all the people who work in research and have this sort of scientific background, they're all going to probably say something pretty similar, you know, especially when it comes to basics. And I think the more people get the same message, especially around like you need to take ownership of your own development, you know, but then when you get resources like this, you know, make sure you put them to use. So a really good point about, again, I think at that age when they're quite young and they do have like, at least here in Australia, you know, you might have APS cricket here in Melbourne, you know, then you've got your local cricket and you might have pathway sort of stuff. And then there are the championship sorts of things where you might play 4 games in a row. I actually, I did some stuff with one of the teams and I tested their hydration before and after, and Will Sutherland was playing in that practice match. It was a 38-degree day. I think he lost 5 kilos in one game. Amazing. You know, and he probably hit 40 odd and bowled 9 and insane.
Like cricket's just brutal, isn't it? On every single like sort of system in the body, it's just like, and like not only that, like not only do you have to put your body physically through so much, you're then getting, you know, chat from these like 35-year-old blokes who just live to shout at you from first slip, and you're sort of.
And you probably get that at your own training. It's like, why don't you keep bowling? Like, that's seriously good. I'm curious to dig into some of these workloads now because first thing up, like, how many overs and how many days a week does the international elite guys bowl? Because I almost have a feeling people think they bowl 100 overs a week. They bowl every day.
So, I mean, it's very dependent on like where they're playing. So
I love that word.
Like workloads in England will generally be lower than those like in Australia because you guys have some lovely roads there, which, you know, the batters love to play on. So I mean, here, like last summer, it was rare that the guys went past like 45, 50 overs, and like when they did
in a week,
they then had like adequate rest because of how the test matches are like generally spaced out. And I think you saw with Jofra, like when he bowled too much and he took a test out, stuff like that. So they're like very well controlled. It's at the level one, they're like at the county level. I'm sure it happens at the state level where they're having like back-to-back games. Like you have like 2 4-day games that start like in the same week, and you're looking at players and thinking these guys are bowling a lot of overs. Like you end up looking through their data, you're like, Jesus, guys bowled 65 overs this week. Like that is mad. You're thinking they're just going to break, and then, you know, a few weeks later they get some injury, whether that's a stress fracture or a hamstring strain or a side strain. Something will break in the body because you can't condition for that unless you're, I guess we're lucky here in the fact that you can bowl 75 miles an hour here and be elite because of the conditions, whereas in Australia, if you bowl 75 miles an hour, I'm sure just get hit out the ground.
It's pedestrian.
Yeah, but I think there's a big difference between the perception of how much bowlers bowl and how much they actually bowl. Like they're not bowling 100 overs a week. You know, their usual workload in the summer here is usually 25 to 35 overs a week, which is reasonable and fine. I know like most of the physios that I speak to, they aim for the elite guys, like the guys past age like 25. They're looking for 25 to 30 overs would be perfect because it keeps everything in tune and it doesn't overload them.
Perfect. That's almost exactly what I can put into a little mini clip and say, here you go, guys. 25 to 35 is what the best guys do. And in that question I put out, I had some dude say I bowl 7 days in a row, sometimes 10, and my shins start getting sore and my back starts getting sore. Just, oh Jesus. I reckon I've reposted the same thing saying you know, don't bowl every day. So yeah, there was a couple of things.
Yeah,
looking at
definitely.
the
So I think we're big believers in rest is key. So if you have a day, say if you're playing a like multi-day game and you bowl like something like 15 overs in a day, you're going to feel sore. So we just think about two sleeps. Two sleeps is usually good to deal with heavy days. Obviously, that's difficult with cricket's so old. There's all these traditions of like 2 innings games might not allow you to have that rest, but you've just got to catch up. So you've got to think, if I bowl 15 overs today and I've got a bowl tomorrow, you might want to have 3 days rest after that. So you're always adapting to what you've done prior. But I think it's important to say that although elite guys can tolerate 25 to 35 overs, younger bowlers might not. So like your 18, 19-year-olds, 20, 21, up to 25, their tolerance isn't going to be as high. So you probably need to scale back a bit on that. But of course, it depends on the individual. So there's a lot of factors which comes into workload. It's not as easy as just saying, you can bowl 30 overs this week until the end of time and you'll be fine. Like it's sadly not as simple as that.
Definitely. And that's why it's good to have that awareness of all the different, mechanisms coming together so that you can manage them. It's good to have, I guess, a guideline, 25, 35 overs a week. I think in the research you put out, you said over 217 or 37 balls, it was 11-fold.
If you bowl, so our research suggests that if you bowl over 39 overs in a week, you triple your risk of getting a stress fracture in the same season. And that was across all ages. We hopefully have some workload guidelines coming out in, another victim of coronavirus was that. So hopefully next season we're going to have some sort of guidance out there for looking at like 18 to 23-year-olds and how they can progress into like elite status without getting injured. Because the thing is, like, if you're 18, 19 and you get a stress fracture, you're out for the season. You lose a year of development, and that puts you behind your peers then. So if you can stop these stress fractures happening and keep these players developing, they're more likely to go on and play in like international cricket or get big contracts with IPL and stuff like that. So it's frustrating when we get told that we're like trying to meddle too much with the cricketers. We really do have their best interests at heart.
That's well put. Yeah, because again, the whole workload discussion at some point, especially in Australia, got to a point where people like just let them bowl. And again, I haven't got the same scientific understanding that you guys do to literally break it down to that level and go, if you let them bowl, this is like what's gonna start happening. It's sad. You definitely get some parents and you get some coaches that just don't understand it and go, that's
old school coaches. Oh.
Yeah. As soon as someone says, "Look, I'm old school, mate," I'm like, nah.
And they all have the mantra, you only get fit by bowling. It's like, oh no.
People think that's what Wasim Akram did. I swear I've had people say, like, Wasim Akram says bowl every day and run laps. I don't think Wasim Akram was bowling every day and running laps.
No, the bloke had a decent rig, so
seriously.
You don't get pecs from bowling.
What about one side?
Yeah.
I swear my right pec is bigger than my left. So that's really cool. Like to have an acute workload to look at, and then I think we sort of briefly touched on like days rest. I've told people based on the 7-4-2, like don't bowl more than 4 days a week, and then have 2 days rest. I think that's curious in how you might apply it when if you have a 39 over week. How would you then look at as an example to map out the next 2 to 4 weeks?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on their age. So if they're young, a 39 over a week would put them more at risk than a older player. But an older player, you might get away with just taking a few overs, ideally, off the next week. Obviously, the challenge with cricket, as in like multi-day cricket, is you don't know what a bowler's going to do in a game, and you can't exactly tell a bowler that you can't. In a second innings, you can only bowl 5 overs because that's just not going to happen. Until we have substitutes, but that's never going to happen. I can't see it. But in like younger players, I think if you're bowling 39 overs in a week, you either need to take some time out or just have an easy week the next week, like, you know, just go for like 15 over a week. I think
you might bowl 2 days.
Cricket Australia did some research and they looked at workload and they found like having a high 90-day workload contributes to stress fracture. So I think there's a balance between, you've got your acute workloads which you need to be aware of, like if they're too high and you keep bowling at a high level on, you're going to get injured. But also if you have a cumulatively heavy workload as well, like over a period like 90 days, you're probably also going to get a stress fracture as well. So you've got to look at two different things really. Like you've got to look at it on a weekly basis, but then you've also got to look back over what have I been doing for the last couple of months. And then sadly, the only thing to help is back to the seesaw again. You know, how far down on the seesaw am I getting with my workload? And then do I need to balance it out with some rest?
Yeah, that's really well put. Especially trying to, again, I get that awareness of, oh shit, I bowled this many and I'm starting to feel a bit sore. I think people would go 2 days a week and get you know, maybe 3 days a week and bowl 663. No, not 663, but something low would probably be able to get guys through.
Yeah, I mean, it's something which is very topical at the moment because, of course, you got cricketers all over the world who are now very deconditioned because, I mean,
that's what I wanted to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's only those who have lovely big gardens, i.e., those who have big, have been able to keep bowling through. I mean, you know, like we've got players who live in like London flats, so.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's a good point. They're tiny.
Their landlords must hate them.
I stayed on a mate's couch in London for a month. His flatmates weren't too happy with my don't think.
They aren't the biggest places in the world, so.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one.
I think I saw an interview with Steve Finn where he was saying, yeah, like I'm in my London flat and like if he puts his arms out, like he can reach both walls in like some places.
That's so crazy.
Wow.
I saw Ben Spokes on an Instagram video bowling in his driveway on concrete.
He's an animal. I think he can bowl on any surface. I think. I
heard he's a bit of a fitness freak and just like seriously.
He puts like some impressive numbers when he comes to screening, in both strength and also running as well. He's not only a good all-rounder on the field, he's like a good all-rounder just in terms of like any strength and conditioning measure.
That's wonderful. Actually, just on that, you know, when you guys are looking at strength measures and whatnot, is it are you looking at a 2 times or like 2 times body weight trap bar deadlift for 3 reps or 1.5 for 3 reps or a 1 rep at something?
I'm also like, I don't actually spend that much time.
I'll have to get Rob on here
to see you guys. So I don't really know what they get up to, so I only see what ends up being put up on Instagram.
That's okay.
And stuff like that. But I think fast bowling, there's a bigger trend now towards like running and having good running technique. So I
like that a lot.
I think you guys posted some videos of like run ups. I think you posted something of like Jimmy's run up and how he runs up and like forefoot technique and stuff. And I think that all relates to back foot contact as well, because if you have the ability to run up on your forefoot, means that back foot contact, can you land on your forefoot? Because if you land on your forefoot and don't sink into your heel, you're probably not going to collapse at back foot contact. So I think it all ties together. I think.
Definitely. And that was almost like where I started thinking, you know, if we know it starts to run up and you have to run, if we can get some of those mechanics looking nice.
I think people forget that cricket, fast bowling is an endurance sport. I mean, and with this incredibly powerful movement in it. But if you think about, I'm sure everyone's seen those images like from the GPS tracking, like how much distance fast bowlers cover in a day in the field, and they're like, you know, upwards of like 20 kilometers. And,
seriously,
you know, and these guys aren't small. Like some of them are like 85, 90 kilos. If you're carrying that amount around for a whole day and you're being asked to like run in pretty hard for like, you know, 120 times a day, you're asking a lot of the body, and you've got to be so conditioned. So like, if you can run with good economy and like with like good technique, there's something else that just decreases the stress on the body as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's sort of where I thought if I can give people some real basic things that they can think about. But I looked at it more like people are landing heel first at back for contact, and you look at their run up and they actually, you know, overstriding, you know, positive angle. And it just looks like shit. Like, come on, mate. You can run like an athlete. This is something we can teach.
Yeah, definitely.
If you were to, again, like put something out simply for younger people, how could you look at avoiding stress fractures? In like, if I summarize some of the simple stuff.
Ooh, good question. So
maybe avoid might be the wrong word, but maybe like reduce the risk.
Yeah, so I think this is a good point where the best way to stop stress fractures is to optimize bone adaptation. Like the best way to stop stress fractures is by having like really strong bones. So if you don't bowl too much, then your bone's going to be in an optimum condition. Like it's not going to be full of damage. If your technique doesn't load your spine too much, the strains on the bone aren't going to be too high. So again, you're not going to have micro damage, and you're going to let the bone get stronger. Like when it comes to nutrition, make sure that you're eating enough food. Like as we just said, you're bowling, running, moving 20 kilometers in a day. You need to eat a lot of food to compensate for that. So if you don't eat enough food, you're not going to allow the bone to adapt. And if the bone can't adapt, then it can't resist the loads.
There's something where like having adequate carbs is important for.
Yeah, I think any energy intake, as long as they're getting the calories in, it should be sufficient. I mean, ideally, it would be, you have a chef, making the most wonderful meals for you. But I think at the rec level, it's just making sure that the calories which you're getting, they should be like good quality calories. Sadly, I think the days of replenishing what you've lost in the field with 10 pints after the game, I think that side of the game is definitely dying out. Maybe not at the very amateur level, like your Division 6 village cricket level.
When you get the Aussies who come over and play cricket in England, they're playing Division 6 and running the bar and whatnot.
Yeah, and they come back like 20 kilos heavier, but it's all in their belly.
Exactly.
Like I'm not a nutritionist, but I just think a balanced diet where you're hitting your calorie goals, and there's plenty of apps now that help you track how many calories you're burning in a day and stuff like that. So I think it's just you got to use the resources that are there, and get eating, because fast bowlers burn a lot more than people probably think.
Yeah, I reckon.
Well, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my conversation with Pete Alway. I definitely enjoyed having it. It's really interesting for me to have a conversation with someone as knowledgeable as Pete and someone who loves bones as much as Pete, because in my role as a fast bowling coach and a strength conditioning coach, it's important for me to understand this side of the injury risks when associated with workloads and potentially some technical faults as well. I have hit Pete up for another conversation, so if you guys do have any comments, I can look at giving them to Pete in the next conversation we have. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them below. If you enjoyed the conversation, I'd be eternally grateful if you shared it with someone who you think might enjoy it. And if you feel like subscribing, I'll leave that up to you. Until next time.